Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala. So, inshallah ta'ala, today we're going to be doing a Facebook Live about the paper that was done actually for the Islamophobia Studies Journal, which is Internalized Islamophobia. I'm sure that many of you have had a chance to read it, I hope. But inshallah ta'ala, we'll go through some of the implications for it. So I'll give you guys a chance to log on so that you can start asking your questions. But this was a paper, that was really eye-opening for me in particular, because it gave me a chance to actually, have some in-depth interviews with some Muslim youth, particularly about, how this environment is affecting them. Now, obviously, in my capacity, I constantly interact with Muslim youth. I constantly get to I constantly have a pulse of what's sort of going on and what's on people's minds, but particularly how their identity was suffering as a result of the poisonous climate that we have, on all around us, that we're really being consumed by this political cycle. So, this was a paper that I actually presented in Paris at the 4th International Islamophobia Conference, Contending Epistemologies, Eurocentrism, Knowledge Production, and Islamophobia. And basically it surrounds these interviews that I conducted with 30 young American Muslims, 19 girls, 11 boys. 15 of the girls reported wearing hijab regularly. All of them were born citizens. 24 were children of immigrants, most of whom were eventually naturalized. So we're talking primarily, the children of immigrants here out of these 30 Muslims. The ages were between 16 and 20. We tried to find a variation of Muslim youth, some that attend Islamic schools, some that don't. And we tried to make sure that we were asking questions to people with different backgrounds, not simply trying to confirm the conclusions that we'd already drawn. So, the way that this interview went, and the way that we really explored these identities, is that we looked at how young Muslims feel like they have to justify their Americanness in some settings and justify their Muslimness in other settings, but then it's also complex within how Muslim the setting is and how American the setting is. And that's where they feel like their identity crisis is really compounded. Also, I think the most enlightening, there were 2 points that I found particularly very enlightening. One of them was that, we constantly, due to the issues of national security and due to this constant collective guilt that's assigned to Muslims when any terrorist attack happens, Muslims always feel like they have to justify Islam's place in the world, and Muslims always feel like they always have to push off this assumption that Muslims are violent. So most of our responses are in regards to accusations that Islam is a violent religion. However, when we talk about the crisis of Muslim youth, young Muslims are more likely to believe in other reinforced stereotypes than the idea that Islam is violent. So young Muslims, for the most part, don't really seem to believe that Islam is a violent religion. They don't really internalize that notion about their faith. They do, however, internalize, the idea that women are second-class citizens in Islam, and that primarily goes to how reinforcing the environment is for them. So if they're in a masjid and they find that sisters are not, don't have really good accommodations in the masajid, then they're likely to internalize that notion. If they're in a family where they have an abusive father, to their mother, or they've witnessed in their culture people that are abusive towards women, then they're likely to internalize that. So obviously there are a lot of reinforcing elements here to be taken into consideration. But at the end of the day, at the end of the day, it starts off with a person, seeing so much around them, and even if they don't realize they're ingesting all of that, they really are, especially when they're not armed with the proper knowledge or with good experiences with the Muslim community, to be able to ward off those criticisms of Islam and to really be able to find that strength in their identity. So I'm not sure if you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask. Uh, Primarily, it's based on the paper, inshallah ta'ala. So if you guys have any questions based on the paper, or at least the subject matter, then please do ask, inshallah, at any point. So you can cut in at any time. Now, if you look at the different sections, one of the things um, that I point out in the instrumentation aspect of this is that usually studies assess uh, the part of the identity crisis that really relates to national identity, not religious identity. So it's not really as much of the Muslim identity that academics are focused on, but it's how American is this person going to be with their identity crisis? How British are they going to be? How French? How German? So this is a different side of that coin, of that study. I did, point out some of the other studies that have been done. One of them does focus quite a bit on um, on the racial identity and citizenship and participation, and how that's affected by this identity crisis. And we also looked at the Newer Kids study that a lot of people might have seen, which really focuses on toddlers and young kids and how they're internalizing Islamophobia. And they sort of based that off the Black Doll study, where just like black people, Muslim or non-Muslim, right? But young black people in this country in particular, um, and in other places that have suffered, um, similar racial circumstances, they're likely to see that blackness is not as beautiful as whiteness, and they're likely to associate positive things with whiteness as opposed to blackness. And one of the things that I point out in this study is that as people get older, as you move from infant to toddler, and then eventually you go to middle school and high school, that identity crisis is really compounded. So you look at what Charles Parrish mentions about black adolescence, and how it goes far beyond black and white at that point. They notice all the different variations in between, and they tend to associate beauty with a lighter form of black skin, right? And all of that is clearly ingested. And with Muslims, it's not just simply hijab wearing and not hijab wearing, masjid going and not masjid going. It's okay, well, how do you wear your hijab, and what messages do you want to send off or project to Muslims and non-Muslims, to school, to others, classmates, or to colleagues when you wear your hijab? What message do you want to give off when you go to the masjid? What are you trying to project of yourself in such an image-conscious world? So we really looked at the side of the Muslim piece of this, and how that was being impacted by everything. And keep in mind here, if you go to the study of the portion of this about those that were actually trying to get help from psychiatrists and mental health physicians, they found that by and large, number one, they couldn't go to Muslims because they couldn't trust them for confidentiality issues, and some of them actually did mention their confidentiality being compromised in those sessions, so it's too close to home. So the solution is not just to have more Muslim psychiatrists, but also to educate non-Muslim psychiatrists, because a lot of times when these young people go to non-Muslim psychiatrists, that psychiatrist has already, drawn many conclusions as to why this young Muslim girl is feeling sad and depressed, and already making assumptions about their family and their religious culture and so on and so forth. So it is very important for us to really navigate this wisely, inshallah, and to provide research, not just for Muslims, but for non-Muslims that are caretakers in this regard. So I'm going to look at the questions here. Mamira asks, Islamophobia has had huge impact, but for us who live in a relatively neutral environment in countries like New Zealand, our youth still face the problem of blending in. So my 16-year-old has so many questions. It's exactly about what you said, like segregation in the masjid. Why is there an extreme separation in the masjid? Is it haram for men and women to be together? So that's, it's important that you bring that up, that Islamophobia has very clear effects, but at the same time, it's going to be natural for young people, to want to assert themselves in a way that that culture will praise. So it's not just going to be in a culture where where they're being looked down upon or where they're being spoken about. And keep in mind here that Islamophobia is not just the right wing bigot that's screaming at you. It's also the assumption or the assertion that your culture, your Islamic culture, is inferior, is inherently inferior. It's not compatible. And I think that even if you're in a relatively neutral environment, um, in a highly secularized or liberal environment, you're still kind of getting that notion that your religion is backwards, and why is your religion, stopping you from just having fun in a way that's natural, in a way that's, um, in a way that's conducive uh, to the happiness of any teenager, right, in that society. So when it comes to this, to your 16-year-old, so there's things that in the masajid that are not necessarily deen, infused, but they're culture infused. Um, and then there are things that are just um, meant to be there as a means of maintaining the rules of haya in Islam. Uh, what I've noted, and Allah knows best, is that if you're in a masjid that's enforcing the sunnah, meaning there is separation, but at the same time, women have, they have roles in the masajid. They're able to participate in all of the programs fully. Um, they have access to the classes, to the programs. They're not holed off somewhere. So it's the separation is not the issue, but it's really the access issue. And then if you don't have access and you do have extreme separation, then all of the grievances are bundled together. So in masajid where men and women attend classes, where they have access to the imam, where they have leadership roles, where they feel welcomed, then the sunnah aspect, the sunnah element of separation is less likely to be um, questioned or less likely to be looked at as in such a negative fashion. Was there any control for socioeconomic background, or did sample size not allow for that? I'll be very honest with you that I don't think, it wasn't a significant one. So no, I didn't. No, I didn't look at the socioeconomic element of this, and I think that's a good point to make. I would say that the 24 of them were the children of immigrants. I would say that 20 of them, for sure, 20 out of the 30 came from very healthy socioeconomic background, meaning they're essentially suburban Muslims. So 10 of them were not. Um, but no, that was not an element in the criteria for choosing those that would be studied. Were there any findings on the role of the masjid? Does it protect from harmful effects, or was there no correlation? Yeah, there was. So if you go to the portion of the paper which is under the role of personal experience and what types of Islamophobia are ingested, you look at particularly that paragraph where we talk about the mosque. So I say this is also the case with community grievances. A bad experience in the mosque can serve as a reinforcement of Islamophobic messages. Young Muslim women face the greatest pressures in society, yet are the least accommodated in the mosques that are responsible for generating spiritual strength. So those young Muslims that felt a good attachment to the masjid, that felt like the masjid was spiritually giving them the willpower to be able to deal with the struggles that they would face. And it's not just educational. One element of it is receiving the education that's necessary to ward off Islamophobic notions. The other is generating that spiritual willpower, that spiritual strength, generating an emotional attachment to the deen, generating a love for the religion. So a positive masjid experience does the opposite of what a negative masjid experience does. It wards off many of those Islamophobic notions, and then you have these people that are enjoying the benefits of the masjid, and they are actually confident in the answers that they have to give in defense of their religion, because they're experiencing, for example, the way that the Deen or the way that Islam legislates women should be treated in a good way. So they're experiencing kindness and courtesy and things that aren't associated typically with Islam in the media. So there's no doubt that having that positive Muslim experience does indeed serve as a fortification against those types of doubts and against those types of attacks. So how do we answer such questions like why do women have to cover themselves more than men, and why Islam seems to suppress women according to the modern times? So we have some great research that's coming out on these topics. Some really, really great research. One of them is a paper on the spiritual equality of men and women in Islam, and how spiritual inequity has typically been the foundation by which women, were oppressed. So once you sort of establish that equity at the spiritual level, then legislation does not come from a place of cruelty. It comes from a place of benefits, which obviously we do believe is the case in our Deen. Then we have a lot of discussions on law and legalities and covering and inheritance and testimony. So we actually have 3 papers that are in process now, that are finishing up, inshallah, on this subject. Any way to be a part of the Yaqeen research and application on the website. So we're actually going to be releasing a call for papers in the next couple of days, inshallah, so stay tuned for that. All right, my tutor said he was asked to swap seats aboard because 2 Muslim women were not comfortable sitting next to him. He considers it as discrimination against men. How do you explain this to a non-Muslim? So your tutor is a man. He was asked to swap seats aboard because 2 Muslim women were not comfortable in sitting next to him. He considers it as discrimination against men. How do you explain this to a non-Muslim? This is one of those very difficult subjects because cultural sensitivity is not our strength these days. It's important to note that type of discomfort, and you could flip the script as well. If it's 2 men and they wanted to sit, there was a woman and the woman was asked to switch seats, is it discrimination? So it's interesting here that in the case that you're mentioning, it's a man and it's not a woman that's complaining that he feels like he was discriminated against. The idea would be that, when he was asked to move, and obviously I don't know what you mean by aboard, whether it's an airplane or a train or a subway, what the proximity is, but clearly there are comfort levels, and comfort levels would be dictated not just by religious practice, but by cultural sensitivity. I think that it's important to when you say explain it to a non-Muslim, do you say explain it to the tutor or explain it to another non-Muslim? I think it's important to articulate these things in a way that's not offensive and that makes those people want to show courtesy, and at the same time recognize that, look, there are some times that we're going to be portrayed as inherently barbaric and we just can't do anything about that. We're not going to be able to always win those types of arguments and discussions because a person is set on already making Islam out to be, oppressive towards women, or putting this extreme gender separation because women are viewed inherently less. So the idea would be, if these were 2 Jewish women that sat down, Orthodox Jewish women that sat down, because Orthodox Jews also have the gender separation in their places of worship, would he still have felt that way or not? Maybe he would have, but it's very possible and very likely that he has not assumed the things about Jewish women that he did about Muslim women. So this idea of some gender separation is not something that's unique to Muslims. It's not something that's Muslim specific. It's something that exists across religions and sometimes across cultures. There was a time in America where someone may have, felt uncomfortable in that situation. So I think you explain it in a respectful way. You explained it in a way that demonstrates that you are not implying that he is less and usually that she is less, because usually the equation would be otherwise. But this is a matter of comfort. It's not because of the person. It's not because of some looks that he had. It's not because of something that he did. But there are different, ethical codes and laws that govern modesty in different systems. Um, and maybe, just maybe, he derived those conclusions because it was a group of Muslim women, and not a group of someone else. So, based on your interviews, would you say Muslim youth identify their Muslimness as a racial, cultural identity rather than a religious one? If so, how do you think this view will impact later generation youths with Muslim background in terms of even identifying as Muslim? ISPU just, I think they released some great, great, great work, mashallah. Just showing us where our community's at right now. I was very happy to see some of those findings. When I say happy, that doesn't mean that I'm happy with all the findings, but to see that, we're getting some answers on some of these crucial things as well, just in terms of identity in the political sense and the cultural sense. There's no doubt that in trying to navigate the waters between isolation and assimilation, you do end up, you do end up with some that will healthily integrate while holding on to their religious identity, and some that will, almost fully assimilate. And we already see that in second, third generation Muslims even, where people only identify in the cultural sense as being Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ told us that there would come a time that people would say Allah, and they would only say Allah and La ilaha illallah because they said that they heard their parents saying that. And that would be the only thing. And Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu was asked what would that do for them at that point. He said it would save them from the fire. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala certainly knows the circumstances that a person is going to be in and how those circumstances will influence the way that they view their religious identity. Allah is well aware of that, well acquainted with that. So what does that mean for us? I think that it's important for us to understand that this is a natural trend. It happens to other religious communities, and we need to study other religious communities, the Christians around us. America's emptying church problem. Just as you have youth that are unmosqued, you have youth that are unchurched and unsynagogued. Studying that trend and not simply screaming about it or shouting about it and yelling at those that are following that trend and saying, you're just like everybody else, and diminishing them or dismissing them in the way that we speak to them, but instead trying to make sure that our institutions do not facilitate that type of exodus out of true Muslim identity. What I mean by that is that we need to understand that we're not going to be able to save everybody, that we're not going to be able to stop everyone from assimilating fully. The more comfortable we get, the more complacent we get, the easier it becomes to abandon things that would make it already, make an already awkward situation, because young people already have a hard time fitting in without any of the religious barriers that are placed. So, people will naturally want to abandon those things that they feel like will place burdens upon them in assimilating. So I think that we need to understand that we're not going to be able to save everybody, but I do think that there are a lot of people, that there's, a mass of people that are still very interested in abiding by, their deen, and they're trying to figure this out. And there is a healthy integration that we can find, inshallah, and we can identify, and we need to keep working at. It's not going to be perfect. We're not going to be able to stop trends that are bigger than us. But inshallah, we will be able to do our part, and we will be able to at least highlight a compassionate orthodoxy that will appeal, inshallah, to enough people to be able to keep the deen strong in this country and in other places, inshallah. So I think it just goes to it just goes back to us and what we're doing against that tidal wave. To just point out the failures of other religious communities is not sufficient, but instead to study those and to say, what is it that we can do differently? As ISPU, the ISPU study did show that young Muslims are more likely to say than other religious communities and other religious groups that religion is very important to them. So there is an attachment. There are many, many young Muslims that want to be religious, and we often write them off based upon a few actions or their appearances, we often write them off as being insincere to the religion, and that's the worst thing that we can have. Sheikh Abdullah bin Jibreen, rahimahullah, said that the beautiful person only sees beauty in others. You need to see the good in someone and extract it, not see the bad in someone and then overwhelm their good. There is a sincere, genuine inclination in so many young people that really, want salvation in the hereafter, want to stay true to their religion, but at the same time, want answers, and are going to sometimes fail in their pursuit of trying to stay centered. So we need to just be compassionate with them, inshallah, show them the religion in a way that we don't compromise the religion, but at the same time, we deliver it in the most beautiful fashion and manner, inshallah, so that we have something with this tidal wave of prescribed secularism that is always on the assault on our faith community and other faith communities. Wallahu ta'ala. Okay, guys, jazakumullah khairan. I appreciate you guys tuning in today. Inshallah, stay tuned. I'll be doing on the abortion paper very soon as well, inshallah. And stay tuned as other presenters will present their papers, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Subhanakallah wa hamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.